Hello everyone, I'm Luke Dawson. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the famous/infamous crusading orders, the Teutonic Order. This is a picture of them, or at least a painting of what they would be depicted as. So for my thesis statement, the Teutonic Order transformed crusading ideology into a campaign of Christianization and colonization in the Baltics, using religion to justify territorial expansion and control, as shown in Pieter's of Duisburg's Chronicle of the Land of Prussia. The order reframed warfare against pagan peoples as a sacred duty, showing how religion and empire became intertwined in Europe, especially as the centuries go on. So it started a bit like the origins. So this knightly order goes all the way back to the Third Crusade and the siege of Acre. Here, as I have lovely shown in my art down here, this is my work. Here at the siege of Acre, German crusaders and merchants from Bremen, Lubeck, and other city-states founded a hospital outside when it was still under siege, and then went in once the city had been captured, and provided medical services and assistance to all the wounded soldiers. Then in 1191, they were officially recognized by Pope Celestine III as an actual hospital order. They were called the Order of Saint Mary of the German House in Jerusalem. Hospital comes from because they're a hospital, they're a place of healing. Saint Mary because they're paragon. They're like the person they worshipped was Saint Mary, and then German House in Jerusalem because they're Germans in Kingdom of Jerusalem. Then a couple years later, Pope Innocent III elevated them to a military order called the Teutonic Order. Basically, it was the same name. Basically, they just switched out hospital with order. And Teutonic is just like, it means like it's just like a German word for of the Germans. So it's basically just essentially it's the Order of Germans in Jerusalem. So it's shortened to the Teutonic Order. They had the same privileges as the other famous orders, the Templars and the Hospitallers, and their headquarters was at Acre, and would be so till the end of the 13th century. They played a major part in the Levant in two main crusades, the 5th and 6th Crusade. The 5th one is where they had their primarily military affairs. They helped invade Egypt and at like the siege of Dalmatia at the port city there, and this was their main military contribution to the Crusades. But what I would consider their main actual contribution that would go on to affect them for centuries to come was in the 6th Crusade, by Emperor Frederick II of the Holy Roman Empire. Otherwise nicknamed as like the crusade was nicknamed as like the diplomatic crusade, because there's not that much fighting. It was mostly Emperor Frederick just going around like shaking hands and trying to get peace. And I would consider this the most important to the order as a whole, because during this crusade of a sorts, the Emperor Frederick made good acquaintance with the fourth Grand Master of the order, Hermann von Salza. These two good friendships that they made would go on to affect this order for centuries to come, and then over time, over the decades, especially going into the 13th century, especially into the 13th century, the order would split their attention from the Holy Land to other places in Europe, and as a whole, it would decline in value, especially as the Crusader states fell one by one, until eventually, when Acre fell in 1291, that would end the order's presence in the Holy Land and would move the capital somewhere else for a time. Going on to the next part of the origins, Europe. So part of that cooperation I talked about between the emperor and the Grand Master was Emperor Frederick gave a bunch of land to the holy to the knights all across the Holy Roman Empire. You see here, you have to understand that the Teutonic Order is deeply intertwined with their Germanic heritage. So most of their territory is going to be in the HRE. And a little interestingly, if people notice down here, they have a lot in Sicily. That's because the emperor at the time, Emperor Frederick II, he was also king of Sicily, so he could give away land down there to the order, which is just a little fun fact. But when it comes to the order expanding into Europe, it started first with Hungary. Basically, Hungary under King Andrew II was dealing with a big Turkic issue. Turkic nomads called the Cumans were invading and raiding through over here in like Romania and Transylvania, and they were raiding into Hungary. So the king basically asked for the Teutonic Knights to move in and settle and colonize the region down here, and to basically defend it. Now, they expressly were not given sovereignty over the land. They were basically given like a semi-level of autonomy, but it was still it was like a leasing. They did not own the land though. That's the big thing, and because of that, they had a lot of issues between the order and the king. Basically, the king had set out a bunch of rules of what the order could and couldn't do. Like the order could put up castles, but the castles couldn't be stone, and the order still had to follow a lot of the king's rules. Like the order tried to make itself clear that its autonomy was based on the papacy, not on the king, but the king didn't like that, and the order would go on to break those same rules with the castles, where when King Andrew went on crusade in 1217. When he left, the order would just build stone castles, basically just going behind his back. So when he returned, of course, he was pissed off, and that didn't cause him to then like strip the order of their rights, because the order the order they went against his orders, but they also were extremely successful against the Cuman raiders. So it was a hard decision there. Like if you get rid of the knights, the raiders are going to come back in and screw up Hungary again. So it's like you have to decide, thread the needle there. And for a little bit that lasted until the order kind of went a step too far, when in 1224 they received papal support for their autonomy and independence in the region, and the King Andrew had none of that. It was one thing to have them under him and like protecting the area. It's another thing to be like owning it all together. So he booted them out of of Transylvania, and from there he booted them in 1225. A year later, Duke Conrad of Mazovia, a Polish duke, this is where the big start of the knightly order happens. Basically, he was dealing with a bunch of raiders from the Baltic regions up here in Prussia, Kurland, and Livland land, and he called the knightly order to help in like settled land. Specifically, though, he actually gave them a sliver of land they controlled, that was their own personal sovereignty. So unlike before, it was like a leasing sort of like weird autonomy situation, this was actually like, oh, you are going to directly control this and own this, and I'm not going to have power over it. I just need your help with these raiders. So, and the knightly order eventually agreed, not only just because that, but also because of the friendship between the emperor and the Grand Master, where what was called the Golden Bull of Romania in 1226, Emperor Frederick II granted the order sovereignty over any Baltic lands they conquered. And so then the order went in, settled around here in around where the duchy is, and then continued on from there. The campaign started in the 1230s, and Keeley here. So after Acre fell in 1291, Venice had basically been like the de facto capital of the order for 2 decades-ish. That was until the Malbar Castle was founded here, and that became the capital of the Teutonic Order from then on till like centuries later, when it became Kaliningrad, or Königsberg, not Kaliningrad. But moving on to the order of the Teutonic Order, the structure. Basically, the Teutonic Knights were made to swear vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience as holy knights. This was confirmed by Pope Innocent III, but dedication varied. Like for example, chastity was very heavily enforced in noble knights. Like if you were a knight of the order and you were noble, you had to be chaste. This was heavily enforced. But for like the lesser troops, the like half brothers, I'll get into in a little bit. Those guys, basically the non-noble soldiery, aren't expected to be as chaste. Like, there's like if you want to be chaste, you can. That's a good thing, but like, we're not expecting that, and especially they're not expecting of colonists they're inviting in. When it comes to obedience, of course, they expected that. This was a military order, so there's a lot of centralized command structure that enforced obedience and did pretty well along that guard. But then poverty was the big thing. That was not the case. Poverty was like the opposite for the Teutons. The Teutonic Order was extremely rich. They were essentially landowners, just controlling all of this vast land in the Baltics, and they got rich off of it. So which came kind of to bite them in the ass a little later with what happened to the Templars that I'll talk about in a little bit. But to move on to the ranks. So at the very top, I've talked about earlier, is the Grand Master, or the Hochmeister, as they were called, because these are Germans. Basically, this was an elected position and governed all aspects of the order with a council that helped them. Now, how they were elected? Through the General Capital. Basically, it was a semi-democratic body. Basically, it was like a group of representatives, sort of like the electoral college of a sort, where they would all come together representing their groups, their chapters or whatever, and then they would vote for a Grand Master. And it was also meant to like vote on like policy and stuff, but it was mostly for just voting in essentially a dictator who would then rule until he died. But that was the idea behind it. And then the Hauptmeister would then appoint high officers, a grand commander, a marshal, a treasurer, a guy in charge of the hospitals, and a guy in charge of the equipment. Then below that were leaders of provinces, individual provinces. These were landmeisters. And then individual strongholds like castles and whatnot are controlled by comters or commanders. And then as a whole, the whole order is separated into 3 categories. Knight brothers, which are like the noble soldiers I talked about earlier, the chaste ones that had to be sworn to chastity and whatnot. The priest brothers, which will come up in a second with my primary source. They're basically the clergy. And then the Saracen brothers and the half brothers, which are basically the peasantry and support network. They're the average soldier that's not noble, or they're the farmer or the merchant. They're all the support basis, or the basic soldier that's running this whole order, basically. But moving on to my primary source, The Chronicles of the Land of Prussia by Pietro of Dunsburg. Basically, Pietro of Dunsburg was a priest brother of the Teutonic Order, and he wrote this roughly in 1326. This is when it was published. It was commissioned by his Grand Master, Werner von Orselin, essentially to celebrate the order. It portrays the order as not as this expansionist empire, but as a holy crusade to save the souls of the pagan Prussians. Basically, this is a holy, this is a good thing. What they're doing was a good thing to save them. We're trying to protect, we're trying to save them, save their souls from damnation. And he does like compare their campaigns to like David versus Goliath and other biblical struggles like the Israelites. So it's like a little ridiculous. But a lot of this was because why this is essentially a propaganda piece. That's the big thing this is, because barely a little over a decade ago, the Templar Knights, a fellow order, got heavily suppressed by the papacy and the French crown for accusations of greed, corruption, and heresy. The same kind of thing is going on in Prussia. The Teutonic Order is heavily, like as I mentioned earlier, they are heavily rich. They are swimming in cash from all of their conquests and them being landowners. So that would look, so if the Templars are getting screwed over and being suppressed, well, what about us? So we have to paint ourselves not as this greedy order, but as this holy light for that we're trying to make a greater Christian world, and just basically trying to justify themselves to the rest of Latin Christians, just so they didn't get suppressed. As Piotr wrote in his own thing, this reverend knighthood was not only confirmed by men on earth, but also prefigured in heaven and earth, the knights of the crucified one. Basically, you get the idea. He's trying to paint the whole order. It's this very religious, very divine thing that you should actually look up to and not criticize. But But just a little show how Baltics changed, even just like in a couple of decades. So in the start of the 13th century, these are the various tribes over here: the Prussians, the old Prussians, the native ones, the Lithuanians, the Karelians, and the Latgalians. These are all the native peoples. They follow pagan beliefs and whatnot. And then just like 60 years later, we're looking at all of these wars. We're seeing subjugation and conquest on just in such short a span of time, in conversion. Interesting thing though is, like with Livonia over here, it wasn't originally part of the Teutonic Order, because this is all like we're showing the Teutonic Order here. Livonia was its own separate knightly order that invaded with the Teutonic Order, but in Karelia over here. But they failed spectacularly. After like a decade, they got crushed, and their order collapsed. It got disbanded, and then survivors went with the Teutonic Order, and all together just became one large order that's now all doing all of this. Just a little aside there. But just to show how quickly things can change in such a short amount of time. I mean, this is basically their capital is still in Acre, in the Holy Land. So it just goes to show a major change. But on to the legacy of the Teutonic Order. So you might have picked it up from some of my hints, but while the Teutonic Order went on to decline in the 15th, 16th century, their crusade in the Baltics became like a chilling origin for some later stuff down the line with other empires, like using religion not as this, basically using their horrible actions of conquest and colonization through a religious lens. Oh, we're not taking all these people, we're not enslaving them, we're not stealing their resources because of greed. We're doing it because we're trying to Christianize them. We're trying to civilize them. We're doing good for them. And you see this with the Crusaders, and then you see it later down the line with Spain and Britain and all these other empires. So it's like this is like the stepping stones of what's going to happen way later down the line. Just as my finisher line right there. But that's why we're excited. Thank you all for watching. I hope you have a good one.